Today, we're talking about the latest trade noise around Ja Morant, Anthony Davis, and Zion Williamson. We're also going to be talking about if the Chicago Bulls should be looking to make a big move for a superstar at this upcoming NBA trade deadline. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to slam dunk on that subscribe button, just like Modest Mazelis slam dunks in games. And so in exchange for slamming on that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Chicago Bulls. And so make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Chicago Bulls Insider family as we talk nothing but Chicago Bulls basketball. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it as we're talking about the latest trade noise around Ja Morant, Anthony Davis, and Zion Williamson. And so starting with the latest around Ja Morant. So if you've not got a chance to see this, it looks like that the Memphis Grizzlies are very open to moving Ja Morant in this upcoming NBA trade deadline. In fact, this is what Shams tweets out. And so he says that for the first time, the Memphis Grizzlies are entertaining offers to potentially move two-time All-Star Ja Morant ahead of the February 5th NBA trade deadline, sources tell ESPN. Shams does also say that in a potential deal, the Memphis Grizzlies would be looking for younger players and draft picks. And so keep that in mind because we're getting ready to take a look at a mock trade for Ja Morant. So the Grizzlies reportedly looking for younger players back and also to seeking draft picks. And so now I wanted to go ahead and jump into an article that has a mock trade that would send Ja Morant to the Chicago Bulls. And so if you want to read about this, you can head over to SB Nation. And this is written by Ricky O'Donnell. And there's 3 teams that he lists. And he has some mock trade situations. And so here's the one that he has with the Chicago Bulls. And so with the Bulls, they would get Ja Morant. They also would get John Conchar as well. The Memphis Grizzlies would get Zach Collins, Coby White, and Dalen Terry. And if the reports are true, that would also mean that the Grizzlies would get some type of draft capital as well. Again, that's if that's what the Grizzlies are looking for. And so that's what Shams is saying. And so one more thing before we jump into just really the positives and the negatives with this possible deal is that the Grizzlies would also have to waive a player to make this deal work. But you do see it is a success with the money matching up and everything else. And so let's go ahead and let's start with the Memphis Grizzlies. And so for the Grizzlies, I think that this would be a win-win situation for them. I think that starting with Coby White, yes, he is coming over on an expiring contract. You're just taking a look at him. You're not sure if he's going to come back. But I do think that with Ja Morant not there, I do feel like that Coby White would be a huge impact to the Grizzlies, especially with the bigs that they have and the way that he can kind of open it up with his handle and everything else. And so I think that that would be huge for the Grizzlies there. And I think that with Zach Collins, he is going to add some physicality and a little bit of versatility to the Grizzlies front court. And I think that that would make it interesting for them because I think that they can get a bit more versatile there in the front court. Because remember, with Jaren Jackson, he actually struggles, I think, with the foul trouble. And so I think that with Zach Collins, that kind of helps you there. And so I could see that the Grizzlies could lean in on him, to go along with Zach Collins there. And so for Jaren Jackson Jr., you are really not worried too much if he gets in foul trouble because you have Zach Collins. And then with Dalen Terry, look, I think that he would be in a situation where he gets a chance to really find, himself as far as just who he can be as an NBA player. Because I think with the Chicago Bulls, it's been a bit of an up and down situation as far as him finding some minutes and everything else. And I think that at times he shows some great stuff. At times he struggles, but I do think that the way that he's going to get better is he needs to play through his mistakes and everything else and just really just learn as he goes along. And so I do think that he would get that chance there with the Memphis Grizzlies, especially at the wing position and them really liking to go, with these younger wings and things like that gives them some versatility. Now for the Chicago Bulls, I think that number one for them, if they're trading for Ja Morant, they're going to get a player that does fit their timeline because Ja Morant is 26 years old. So I think that that would be a plus there for the Chicago Bulls. Number two, you're talking about trading for a player that has had some experience in this league. And so with Ja Morant, talked about him being a two-time All-Star. I think that also too is, something that you can't measure in stats. And I think that when you look at AK and just really what he said in the past, he's wanted to go out and trade for younger players that have done some things in this league. And so Ja Morant certainly has done that. And also with Ja Morant, he's been the face of the Grizzlies franchise. And so you're talking about a franchise player. Now, that would be interesting how that works out with the Bulls, with that experience coming over as a franchise player. Obviously, the way that he's handled things with the Grizzlies and stuff like that, perhaps maybe it helps you with the Bulls, as far as being the face of a franchise and just kind of leading that way, so I think that maybe that's something, again, that you can't measure in stats. And so we'll give him that as far as one of the positives in this thing. And next, I would say that with Ja Morant, you get a player that's under contract. And so unlike Coby White in that situation, you're getting a player that is under contract until 2028. And so I think the vast majority of the NBA trades that are going to go down, it's for players that are on expiring contracts. And so with Ja Morant, he is going to be under contract until 2028. Now, as far as just really the potential negatives with this and just looking at, just the Chicago Bulls here. And so number one, I think that the biggest issue here is that when you look at just the availability, like the availability with injuries or suspensions, like that would be something that I think would be a huge risk for the Chicago Bulls going after Ja Morant. And then, you look at the fact that what are you giving up to get that? And so, if it is a situation where he struggles with the injuries and then maybe some off the court stuff, you're talking about giving away some draft capital, which I think the Bulls really need to turn some things around here with this team. And then you're also giving away, I think some of your better expiring contracts. I do feel like that Coby White, Io, Kevin Huerter, Zach Collins, like all these guys are like, those are some good expiring contracts that some teams really could want. And so you don't want to move them for, a player that really you don't know if they're going to be available, because I think that would be huge. If you're trading for Ja Morant and his contract, you need him to be available, which leads me to the next point with his contract. And so I did point out the fact that he is under contract, but, with his contract, he's owed, a pretty good amount over the next couple seasons. And so right now he's making $39 million. This is according to Spot Track. He's set to go up a little bit to $42 million in the 26-27 season. And by the 27-28 season, you're looking at about $44 million and some change. And so the Bulls would have to be willing to commit to that contract. And so that's another thing to think about. He would be an unrestricted free agent in the 28-29 season. And so he's just 29 years old. And so still, you have a good runway there if you decide to go with that. Now, when you look at the numbers for Ja Morant, you will see that certainly he's put up some numbers and things like that. But right now, he's in the midst of a tough season. And so he's averaging 19 points a game. It's one of his lowest, actually the lowest that he's had this in his career since year number two, or actually, no, it's the second lowest. And so year number one is 17.8. And so 19 points this season. And then when you look at the assist, 7.6 assists, not bad there. He's shooting 90% from the free throw line. So that's good. But then look at the three-point percentage, 20.8% from downtown and just 40.1% from the field, which is actually his lowest of his career. And so, with that three-point percentage, that also too, I think would really be risky in bringing over Ja Morant, especially with the way the Bulls offense is. It's made to get out in space and pace, and you want to be able to knock down those three-point shots and really make defenses pay. And so you don't want to have a situation where, teams are packing it in the paint. Like, I think that would be, one of the issues that you worry about. And then number two, defensively, like Ja Morant is not necessarily the greatest defender. And for a team that needs to get more physical, it also needs to get just better defensively, not just on the perimeter, but the interior. This trade doesn't address that. And you would wonder what the Bulls would do to address that, because if you're giving off draft capital and then you're getting Ja Morant, that would suggest that you're going to be possibly looking to speed up the timeline. But what are you going to do because you're taking on that type of salary? And so I think that that really leads to a lot of questions, and I'm not sure the Bulls necessarily would have the answer there. I wonder about the fit there too, because this is assuming that Josh Giddey is still with the team, which obviously he's under contract. They've already given him the keys to the offense. And so how would that dynamic work out? And then also too, Ayo Dosunmu possibly having to step up, if you move on from Coby and not him. And so how does that work out? And then, how does it work out with your front court now? Because you don't have Zach Collins. I think Jalen Smith has played well. Vooch has been very much up and down this season. And so you still don't have, again, a lot of interior play, on the offense or the defensive end. And so that right there is another reason why I'm not sure that this would necessarily be the best move. Again, we're looking at a mock trade. So for me, I'm out on this, with the fit. Also, too, I'm out on this with the money that you would have to go ahead and allocate with that contract. And the next, defensively, and just not being able to knock down the three ball, I'm out on that. The availability is probably the biggest thing for me with the injuries and the possibility of suspension. And so I'm not in on that. I think that if I'm going to trade off draft capital or some of my better expiring assets to really turn this team around, you need to have a player that's going to be available. And so I really, really, would question that. So I'm out on that, but you guys let me know in the comments if you would make this trade. Again, this is a mock trade that was suggested here in this article. And so next, I wanted to go ahead and jump into the latest around Anthony Davis. And so if you have not got a chance to see this, looks like that Anthony Davis is actually been injured again. And so, look, we talked about this before with Anthony Davis. I know that there was a lot of trade rumors around him and the Chicago Bulls. And so, I was out on this because Anthony Davis had been injured. And also, too, I was out on this because of the contract situation. Like, I just thought that if the Bulls were to make a trade for Anthony Davis, you're giving off, a lot of your team to get him or possible draft capital. And so you're really giving up a lot of your depth there to get him. And I'm like, even when you get Anthony Davis over, even if you were to do a load management for him, I still don't trust that he would be available when you need him. And I couldn't see this team really constructing something that would necessarily get you past, maybe the first or second round. Like, I just think that that's where they would be at. And I think that if you're going to make these moves for these superstars, they have to be available. And it's got to be something that's going to push you past a first or a second round. Like, I think it has to go much deeper than that. And I don't think that Anthony Davis would be that player, for the Chicago Bulls. Now, I will say this, he can still be traded. And here's the situation around him. Speaking of that injury that I spoke about just moments ago. And so here's the latest with Anthony Davis. It looks like that he hurt a ligament in his left hand. According to Shams, he's going to go out and get a second opinion. But if he has to get a surgery, he's set to miss a lot of basketball here. And so you can see that it says miss a number of months. And so, that is unfortunate, with Anthony Davis. But again, this is why I'm just not all in on an Anthony Davis trade, or I wasn't all in on an Anthony Davis trade to begin with, because, I just feel like that as players show you who they are, you have to believe them. And for a franchise that's trying to turn things around, you need a player that's going to be available. And so can you imagine if this team would have given up, some of their better expiring contracts and some draft capital for Anthony Davis, and then this would happen? And so with Anthony Davis this season, he missed 14 games with the calf strain. He missed time on Christmas Day with a he had a groin spasm, and then he's only played in 29 games since last February. And so this is why I'm out on this. And so you guys let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking. Would you still be in on Anthony Davis? Because again, you can still trade for him, but he is going to be missing quite a bit of time. And I'm sure that this is probably going to shift the NBA trade market, because the Bulls, there was some rumors around them. Also, too, the Atlanta Hawks recently as well. Those were a couple teams that I know had been linked to Anthony Davis. And so, again, this is the latest. Looks like that he is going to miss a lot of basketball due to a ligament damage in his left hand. And so, next, that leads me to Zion Williamson. And so, with Zion, we talked about this yesterday, as it looks like that the trade rumors continue to pick up around the Chicago Bulls. And I thought that this was very interesting. And so this was from Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. And so talking about the Bulls here in his quote, he said that they have assets and expiring deals to really get involved wherever they want at this trade deadline. Keep a close eye on them, maybe pursuing Zion Williamson from the Pelicans. Siegel said, I've heard that there's been some smoke there about Chicago scouting New Orleans in recent weeks, and Zion would be the ideal buy low candidate for a team like the Bulls, who have a lot of expiring contracts. And so let's start there with the end of this, with Brett Siegel saying, hey, a buy low candidate for a team like the Chicago Bulls. And so for Zion, I'm not sure that the Pelicans are necessarily looking to really go and have him in a buy low situation. In fact, I think it's the opposite. I think that there's probably going to be more to get Zion than is really reported out there. I could see that the Pelicans would try to get a pick. And I certainly think that for the Bulls to get him, I think that they're going to have to come off some of their better expiring. Like, I could see that they would want Coby. I could see that they would want Io as well, even though those are guards. But still, I think that, with those assets, I think that they would maybe be looking to acquire them and maybe either bring some of them back, or they could be looking to flip them as well. And so I think that that would have to be included in a possible deal for Zion. And then also, again, I think that they would be looking for picks. And so for me, just going into one of the other things that's mentioned in that quote from Brett Siegel and talking about scouting the Pelicans, I hope I hope the Bulls are scouting a Trey Murphy III or a Herb Jones, or also are you looking at Eve Missy? Like, I think that those are some of the players that I would like to see the Bulls, possibly bring back. Heck, I'd even like to take a chance on Jordan Hawkins. And I'm not even, a person that looks at this and says, hey, let's bring back a guard. But I do think that there's some potential there with Jordan Hawkins. I think he's a player that hasn't necessarily got a chance out there, but I do think that, man, he can certainly shoot the basketball. Got a chance to watch a lot of his games at UConn. And so, I like him as a player, but I think that there's other assets that the Bulls could possibly get, from the Pelicans. And I'm not saying that it would cost less, but I do think that I would like to take the chance more so with them than Zion, because with Zion, just like Anthony Davis, and really I think the lesson that we learn here is that when you're trading for players that are injury prone, this is possibly what could happen. And with Zion, he's been a great player when he's been on the floor, but he has missed a lot of games, like over 50, percent of his games have been missed due to injury, unfortunately. And I just think that when you're trading for superstars that have been injured, like, I don't think that you would want to give up that draft capital. I feel like that with draft capital, what you can do with that is that if you hit in the draft, number one, you could get a player like a Zion, like an Anthony Davis, like a Ja Morant that is much younger, and also too could be more healthier as far as staying out there, but also too they're under a rookie scale type of contract. That's another thing to think about, instead of trading for these guys like that. And then number two for me is that, even in an era where we see a lot of load management and stuff like that, I don't think load management would work for these players. Like, I think that if you're trading off a lot of pieces for Zion, for Anthony Davis, for Ja Morant, I don't think the Bulls would necessarily have enough to carry the team as these guys are out, because we already see a Bulls team that struggles on a night-to-night basis when players are out. And so you can imagine if they trade away a lot of their depth there, as far as just the pieces that they have for this one superstar player that's supposed to help them get all these wins and things like that, and this superstar player is not available, then you have to wonder, okay, was it really worth it? That you get a star player that's not available. Meanwhile, these pieces that you've traded off, they're helping that other team, win on a night-to-night basis. And so that's one of the things to think about there, with this situation. Just not the draft capital. Load management's not going to do it at this point in time. And I just don't think that it's a good idea to invest into players that, again, you just don't know if you're going to have them out there. And so anyway, you guys let me know in the comments here, would you want to take a chance with a player like Zion Williamson? I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to say yes. But again, I'm saying that, look, if you're trading for players and you're trying to trade your franchise around, you need to have players be available for you. And these players have not been available. And I think that as players show you who they are, you need to believe them there. So anyway, you guys let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking. Are you willing to give off some of your better expiring contracts to take a big risk for these superstar players that have been injury prone? Or would you like to see this team maybe make some moves to bring back some pieces that address that front court, and also to get you a little bit younger as well, perhaps net you some draft capital to where you can build there? Love to hear what your thoughts are. And so look, as we always say, go Bulls, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.